A woman discovers her husband's secret family after 15 years of marriage and makes a shocking choice that leaves everyone stunned. There's a particular kind of silence that comes over a house at night, the kind where the creaks in the floorboards and the distant hum of the fridge become the loudest sounds. I'd grown accustomed to that silence after 15 years of marriage to David. It was a kind of quiet that used to feel comforting, like we'd built a life that was so solid. Even the world around us felt like it could rest easy. But lately, the silence had taken on a different quality. It wasn't peaceful anymore. It was empty. David and I hadn't fought. We didn't scream or throw things or accuse each other of anything. We just stopped talking. He was home less often, claiming longer hours at work. And when he was home, he was distant, glued to his phone or locked away in his office. I chalked it up to stress. Everyone our age seemed stressed. I convinced myself we were just in a slump, a phase, something we'd work through like we always had. At least that's what I kept telling myself. It was a Wednesday night when it all started to fall apart. I was paying bills, going through our joint account online like I always did. David wasn't great with money. He'd forget things like the electric bill, and I'd have to take care of it. So when I saw a recurring payment for a rental property in a town about an hour away, I didn't think much of it at first. We talked about buying an investment property at one point, but that had never panned out. Maybe this was a business deal he hadn't gotten around to mentioning yet. But something about the amount, $500 a month, caught my eye. We weren't rich, not by a long shot, and if he was making payments on a place, why hadn't he said anything? I told myself I was being paranoid, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. I clicked on the payment details, my heart beating faster than it should. There was an address listed, an unfamiliar one in a small town I'd never heard of, a place called Rosewood Pines. A sinking feeling settled into my stomach, the kind you get when you know you're about to learn something you won't be able to unlearn. The next morning, I asked David casually if he knew anything about Rosewood Pines. He froze for just a fraction of a second, his face carefully blank before he smiled and said, "Never heard of it." "Why?" I shrugged, brushing it off like I'd seen the name on a billboard or something. But that pause, that half-second of hesitation, it was enough to plant the first real seed of doubt in my mind. For days, I obsessed over that payment. I couldn't concentrate at work, couldn't sleep. Late at night, while David snored beside me, I'd lie awake staring at the ceiling, my mind running in circles. What was he hiding? Why would he lie? But I didn't want to be that wife, the suspicious, paranoid woman who couldn't trust her husband. So I pushed it down, trying to ignore it, until one afternoon when I couldn't stand it anymore. That Friday, David told me he'd be working late again. Something about a big project deadline coming up, the same excuse I'd heard for the last several weeks. Instead of staying home like I usually did, I grabbed my car keys and headed to Rosewood Pines. It was a small town, picturesque in the way of forgotten places. No chain stores, no big businesses, just mom-and-pop shops, a few diners, and rows of quaint houses. I pulled up the address from our bank statement and followed my GPS until I turned onto a quiet street lined with modest homes, each one slightly weathered but cozy. My heart pounded as I rolled slowly past, scanning the numbers until I found it. 132 Maplewood Lane. The house was small but well kept, with a neatly trimmed yard and a white picket fence. It looked normal. Too normal, like the kind of house we'd once talked about buying when we first got married. I parked a few houses down, my palms sweating against the steering wheel, and waited. I didn't know what I was waiting for, exactly. Maybe I expected to catch David sneaking out of the house, or some stranger answering the door. But after what felt like an eternity, the front door opened, and my world shifted. A woman stepped out, holding the hand of a little boy. The boy couldn't have been more than 5, his dark hair messy and sticking out in all directions. He was laughing, tugging at the woman's arm as she smiled down at him. But it wasn't the boy who made my heart stop. It was the woman. I knew her. Not personally, but well enough. Her name was Laura. She worked in a nearby law firm that David sometimes did consulting for. I'd met her once at a work event years ago, and she'd seemed friendly, professional. Nothing out of the ordinary. But now she was holding this boy's hand, guiding him to a car in the driveway. My pulse roared in my ears as the pieces began to fall into place, each one more devastating than the last. I sat frozen, watching as they climbed into the car, still laughing, still unaware of the storm brewing just a few houses down. David hadn't just been lying. He had another life, a family, a son, and I had no idea what I was going to do about it. What would you do if you uncovered a secret like this? Could you confront it head on, or would you wait for the right moment to make your move? Leave your thoughts in the comments. Part 2 is coming soon. The drive home was a blur. My hands trembled on the steering wheel, my stomach in knots. Every mile that passed felt like a deeper descent into a nightmare I hadn't woken up from. I wanted to turn the car around, storm back to that little house, bang on the door, and demand answers. Demand to know how David could betray me, betray our children, betray everything we built together. But I didn't. I couldn't. Instead, I replayed every moment of the last 6 years in my mind, analyzing every late night, every business trip, every strange little lie that I had brushed off. I should have seen it. How could I have been so blind? When I got home, the house was dark, empty except for the sound of the refrigerator humming in the kitchen. David wasn't home yet, of course. He was probably still with them. I couldn't even say it out loud, his other family. The words caught in my throat like they were too big, too heavy to swallow. I collapsed on the couch, staring at the wedding photo on the mantel across from me. 15 years. 15 years of loyalty, of love, of sacrifices we both made to raise our kids, build a life, and trust that we were doing it all together. And it had all been a lie. Not just a one-time mistake, not a fleeting affair, but a full-blown second life. He'd looked me in the eyes, kissed our children goodnight, and then turned around and done the same thing with someone else. I couldn't stay like this, frozen in shock. I needed answers. Hours later, the front door creaked open. David walked in, carrying the same work bag he always did, the same tired expression on his face. He dropped his keys on the counter, gave a quick glance at the living room, and smiled faintly when he saw me sitting on the couch. "Hey, you're up late," he said, his voice casual, as if everything was normal, as if I hadn't just watched him with her. "Yeah," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "We need to talk." David paused, his hand lingering on his bag. He turned slowly, his eyes scanning my face, looking for clues. He must have sensed something was wrong because his expression shifted, but he didn't ask what was bothering me. He simply nodded. "What's going on?" he asked, walking over to the couch. He sat across from me, his posture stiff, guarded. It was almost like he already knew. I held his gaze, the silence between us stretching on for what felt like forever. My heart raced, but I wasn't going to give him the satisfaction of seeing me break. "Not yet. Do you know where Rosewood Pines is?" I asked softly. His eyes flickered. There it was again, that brief, almost imperceptible hesitation. But this time, I wasn't going to let him brush it off. I leaned forward, my voice firmer. "Do you know where it is?" David swallowed hard, his eyes darting to the floor, then back up to me. "Why are you asking about that?" His tone was careful, cautious. "I saw the payments," I said. "For the house. I went there today." The color drained from his face. His hands fumbled in his lap, his breath catching in his throat. He didn't have to say anything. His guilt was written all over him, spilling out into the space between us. "You went there," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "I saw her." I continued, my voice growing colder. "And the boy, your son, do you have any idea how that feels, David? To find out that my husband has another family, another child?" The words ripped through him like a knife, and he visibly flinched, his hands shaking as he rubbed his temples. "Emma, please, just let me explain." Explain? I laughed bitterly. Explain what? That you've been living a double life for God knows how long? That you've been lying to me, to our children, every single day? That you've had another child while I've been here raising ours? What could you possibly explain to make this okay? He looked up, his eyes wet, desperation creeping into his voice. It wasn't supposed to be like this. I never meant to hurt you, either of you. It got out of hand. Out of hand, I repeated, incredulous. This isn't some mistake, David. This isn't something you just fix. You've been lying to me for 6 years. 6 years. You have another family. You chose this. He dropped his face into his hands, his voice cracking. I never wanted to choose between you. I love you both. I love both of my families. Both? I echoed, my voice shaking with fury. You think you can love 2 women, have 2 lives, and no one would get hurt? Do you hear yourself? I know it's impossible to understand, but I couldn't walk away. When I met Laura, things were difficult between us. Emma, you weren't happy, and I thought it was over. I didn't plan for this to happen, but it did. And then I couldn't turn back. I was stuck. Stuck. The word hung in the air like poison. Stuck. As if this had all been something that happened to him, not something he had done. And what about our kids? I asked, my voice breaking. Do they mean nothing to you? How could you do this to them? David's head dropped lower, shame finally settling in. I never wanted to hurt them. I never wanted any of this to come out like this. Well, congratulations, I said bitterly, standing up. It's out. Now what? He stood, reaching for my hand, but I yanked it away. Emma, please, we can figure this out. I don't want to lose you. I don't want to lose our family. I stared at him, my anger slowly turning into something darker, something colder. There was no saving this, no repairing what had been broken. But I wasn't about to let him just walk away from the mess he'd made. Not yet. Not without paying for it. I need time, I said quietly, turning toward the stairs. Don't touch me. Don't talk to me. You've already done enough. I could feel his eyes on me as I walked away, but I didn't look back. I went upstairs to our bedroom, shut the door, and sat on the edge of the bed. My mind was spinning, my emotions crashing into each other like waves in a storm. I had no idea what my next move was, but one thing was certain. I wasn't going to let David off that easily. Not without making him feel the weight of every lie, every betrayal. If you were in Emma's shoes, how would you confront a betrayal like this? What's worse, the lies or the fact that David believed he could get away with it? Share your thoughts in the comments. Part 3 will dive deeper into Emma's next move. The days after my confrontation with David passed in a haze. He avoided me, keeping to the basement office like a shadow, trying not to be seen. I hadn't told the kids yet. I couldn't. How could I explain to them that their father had been splitting his love, his time, his very life between us and another family? I wasn't ready for that conversation. And in truth, I wasn't ready for anything. I told myself I needed time to think, to figure out how to move forward. Every instinct in me screamed to leave, to pack up the kids and go somewhere far away where I wouldn't have to see his face every day, wouldn't have to deal with his pathetic attempts at apologies or his hollow promises to fix things. But something kept me from doing it. Maybe it was the shock. Maybe it was the deep-rooted need to make him feel just a fraction of the pain he had caused me. The silence in the house was unbearable, so I busied myself with mindless tasks, sorting through closets, reorganizing the kitchen, anything to keep my mind from drifting back to the image of David's other son laughing in the driveway of that quaint little house. The boy's face haunted me, not because he'd done anything wrong, but because he was the living proof of David's betrayal. The other woman, Laura, I could deal with, but the boy, that was different. He was innocent, blameless. And yet, every time I closed my eyes, I saw him. One afternoon, as I was folding laundry and staring out the window, an idea came to me. It was a terrible, impossible idea, but once it took root in my mind, it wouldn't let go. I was furious. furious at David for what he'd done, furious at myself for being blindsided. But beneath that fury was something else, something darker. Revenge. If David wanted 2 lives, then maybe he should get exactly what he wanted. But on my terms. That evening, after David had left for another supposed late night at work, I grabbed my purse and drove back to Rosewood Pines. This time I didn't park down the street. I pulled up directly in front of 132 Maplewood Lane and knocked on the door. Laura answered after a few moments, surprise flickering across her face when she saw me. For a second, I thought she might slam the door in my face, but instead, she opened it wider, her eyes narrowing. She knew. Of course she knew. "You're Emma," she said, her voice tight. It wasn't a question. She already knew who I was, and I was certain that David had warned her that this day might come. But there was no fear in her eyes, just sadness, and maybe a little guilt. "I'm Emma," I confirmed, standing there, not sure what to expect. "And you're Laura." She nodded, her shoulders stiffening, as if she was bracing herself for the tirade she probably expected. But I wasn't there to scream or accuse. I was there for something much darker. "Can I come in?" I asked, surprising even myself with the calmness in my voice. Laura hesitated, but then stepped aside, gesturing for me to enter. The house smelled like fresh laundry and something baking in the oven. It was cozy, homey, the kind of place I could imagine David settling into after his long absences from me and our children. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was standing in another version of my own life, just an hour away. Laura led me to the living room, where toys were scattered across the floor and a half-finished puzzle lay on the coffee table. She motioned for me to sit, and I did, though I couldn't help but glance at a framed photo on the mantel, a picture of David with his arm around her, smiling like he didn't have a care in the world. I wanted to throw it across the room, but I kept my hands folded in my lap. "What do you want, Emma?" Laura asked, sitting across from me, her voice heavy with exhaustion. I took a deep breath, the words forming on my lips before I even knew what I was going to say. "I know about everything. I know about you, about your son, about the life you've been living with David." Her face paled, and she let out a shaky breath. "I never wanted this," she whispered. "I didn't know about you when we first met. By the time I found out, I was already pregnant with Jack. He told me he would leave you, but I guess that was a lie too." I studied her face, her expression one of defeat, and for a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. But then I remembered that she had known. She had known for years and still chosen to stay. Still chosen to help him live this double life. "You should have left him the moment you found out," I said quietly, my words cutting through the silence. "I know," she whispered. "I should have, but I didn't. And now, I don't know what to do." For a long time, neither of us spoke. The weight of the truth hung between us, thick and suffocating. I could see the fear in her eyes, the fear of losing everything she had built with him, the fear of being the woman left behind when all the dust settled. "I'm not here to ask you to leave him," I said finally, surprising both of us. "I'm not even here to fight with you." Laura blinked, confusion flashing across her face. "Then why are you here?" I leaned forward, my voice low, my words deliberate. "Because I want to propose something." Her eyes widened, but she stayed silent, waiting. "You don't leave him," I said. "And neither do I." Laura stared at me, shocked, her mouth falling open slightly. "What are you talking about?" "We both stay," I continued, the idea crystallizing in my mind. "David's been living this double life, lying to both of us for years. I think it's time he pays for that. If he wants 2 families, then fine. Let him have 2 families. But we're going to control how it works." "You want to share him?" she asked, incredulous. "No," I replied, my voice hard. "Not share. He's going to live with both of us. But we call the shots now. We decide where he stays, when he sees his son, when he sees our kids. We make him live in the mess he's created. Laura looked at me like I'd lost my mind, and maybe I had. But the idea was intoxicating. For the first time in days, I felt like I had power again. I wasn't just the victim of David's deceit. I was the one who could make him suffer for it. "You can't be serious," Laura said, shaking her head. "This is crazy." "Is it?" I asked, standing up, my voice growing stronger. "Think about it. He's been lying to both of us, thinking he could get away with it. But what if we turn the tables? What if we make him live with the consequences?" Laura was silent for a long time, her eyes searching mine for some sign of weakness, some sign that I wasn't really going to go through with this. But there was no hesitation left in me. Finally, she nodded slowly, her face pale. "I don't know if this will work, but I'm willing to try." I turned to leave, feeling the cold satisfaction of control settle over me. "Good. Then we make him choose. But this time, we get to decide how it ends." Would you ever consider a plan like Emma's? Or is her idea a step too far? How do you think David will react when both women turn the tables on him? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. The final part is coming soon. The house felt different that night, even though nothing had physically changed. The walls still stood, the floors creaked in the same places they always had, and the familiar smell of our home lingered in the air. But something in me had shifted, and with that change, the house no longer felt like it was holding me hostage. David came home late, as usual. I didn't ask where he'd been, and he didn't volunteer any explanations. He probably assumed I was still processing, still deciding whether I'd leave or stay. The irony was, he had no idea that decision wasn't his to make anymore. I'd already told Laura everything. We'd agreed to meet again in a few days to finalize the details of our plan. She was nervous, of course. Who wouldn't be? But there was something in her eyes when we last spoke that told me she was ready for this. Ready to reclaim the power David had stolen from us both. I had been scared too, at first, wondering if I was truly capable of going through with it. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that this was the only way to make him feel the weight of his choices. The next morning, as David poured himself a cup of coffee, I sat at the table, watching him. He looked tired, worn down by the stress of maintaining two lives. I wondered how long he thought he could keep it up before it all came crashing down. "We need to talk," I said, breaking the silence. David glanced at me, surprised, but he nodded. "Okay. About what?" I motioned for him to sit across from me, and he did, his eyes wary. "I've made a decision," I said, keeping my voice calm, even though my heart was racing. "I'm not leaving you, David." He blinked, clearly not expecting that. For a moment, relief flashed across his face, but it faded quickly as he noticed the cold, calculated look in my eyes. "But things are going to change," I continued. "You're not walking away from this unscathed." David shifted in his seat, his brow furrowing. "What are you talking about?" "I met with Laura," I said, watching the blood drain from his face. He looked like I'd punched him in the gut, his hand tightening around the coffee cup. "She and I had a long conversation. We both know everything now, and we've come to an agreement." "Emma," David's voice cracked, panic edging into his tone. "Please don't do anything rash. I can fix this. I can." "You can't fix this," I interrupted, my voice sharp. "You don't get to fix anything. This isn't your mess to clean up anymore. You've spent years lying to both of us, juggling two lives, pretending you could have it all without consequences. Well, now you're going to live with those consequences." David stared at me, confused, as if he still didn't understand where this was going. "What does that mean?" "It means," I said, leaning forward, "you're going to live with both of us, but on our terms. You'll alternate between our homes, week by week, and we decide where you go. Laura and I will control everything. Your time, your access to your children, your entire life. You don't get to make any more decisions. We do." David's eyes widened in horror. "You can't be serious. That's insane." "Is it?" I asked, my voice cold. "Or is it exactly what you deserve?" You've been living a lie, David. You've built two lives, and now you're going to live with both of them, but without the freedom to choose. You don't get to walk away from this without feeling the weight of what you've done. He stood up, pacing the kitchen, his hands running through his hair. Emma, please. This isn't what I wanted. I was going to end it. I swear, I was going to end things with Laura and... No, I snapped, cutting him off. You don't get to choose anymore. That's over. You made your bed, David, and now you're going to lie in it. He looked at me, desperation filling his eyes. But how is this going to work? You want me to live two lives? Openly like this? It's going to destroy everything. Good, I said, standing up and meeting his gaze. Because that's what you did to us. You destroyed everything. Now it's your turn to feel what that's like. David slumped back into the chair, his face pale, his hands shaking. He was realizing that there was no way out, that I wasn't bluffing. For the first time since this all began, he looked defeated. We'll start next week, I said, my voice steady. You'll split your time between here and Laura's house. We've already worked out a schedule. This is madness, he muttered, his eyes staring at the floor. It's never going to work. It doesn't have to, I replied, turning away from him. It just has to make you feel what we've felt. The days following our conversation were tense. David barely spoke to me, but I could feel the weight of his fear in every room of the house. He knew there was no escape, that the illusion of control he once had was gone. The kids hadn't noticed anything yet, but I knew it was only a matter of time before they sensed something was wrong. I wasn't sure how I was going to tell them, or even if I should, but for now, I focused on making sure David understood his new reality. A few days later, I met with Laura again. We sat in a quiet cafe, both of us tense, both of us wondering if we were really going through with this. I could tell she was still conflicted, still grappling with the idea of sharing her life with a man who had lied to her, just as he had to me. "You're sure about this?" she asked, her fingers wrapped tightly around her coffee cup. "I don't know if I can do this, Emma. I don't know if I can look at him every day knowing what he's done." "You don't have to love him anymore," I said, my voice firm. "You just have to make sure he understands that he's lost control. We'll decide what happens next. He doesn't get to choose." Laura sighed, her shoulders sagging. "I never thought I'd end up here. With you. Like this." "Neither did I admitted. "But here we are." We sat in silence for a moment, both of us absorbing the weight of our new reality. But there was something strangely comforting in the solidarity between us, as if we had both found a way to reclaim our dignity, even in the face of this madness. David's first week of the new arrangement began quietly. He stayed with me, trying to act like everything was normal, but I could see the strain in his eyes. He was trapped, forced to live the double life he had created, but now with none of the freedom he once had. His time with Laura was just as structured, with her following the same plan. There were no more secrets, no more sneaking around. He was under our control now, and it was killing him. By the second week, the cracks in his facade started to show. He became irritable, frustrated with the arrangement, lashing out in small ways, but never directly at me. He knew better than to challenge the new status quo. He knew I held all the cards now. Months passed, and slowly, things changed. The power I once sought over David began to feel hollow, empty. What had started as a way to make him pay for his betrayal became something else entirely. I realized that no matter how much I controlled his life, it wouldn't undo the hurt he'd caused me. It wouldn't fix what was broken. One morning, I woke up and knew it was time. I couldn't stay in this limbo any longer, couldn't keep living in a world where I was constantly reminding him of his failures. It was time to move on. David was in the kitchen when I approached him, his face tired, defeated. "It's over," I said simply. He looked up confused. "What do you mean?" "I'm leaving," I said. "For good. This whole thing, it was never about us. It was about power, and I don't need that anymore." David stared at me, shock slowly settling in. He didn't argue. He knew better than to try. "Emma, I hope you find what you're looking for," I said, turning to leave. "But it won't be with me." I walked out of the house, the weight of the past finally lifting from my shoulders. For the first time in months, I felt free, free of the lies, free of the betrayal, and free of him. Was Emma right to walk away after all? Or should she have made David live with his mistakes even longer? What would you have done in her shoes? Let me know in the comments.